Last week, a number of people said to me how difficult they found the readings, and in particular how difficult they found the reading from Romans on hope. Well, I'm sorry, but if you thought that was difficult, I have to say the readings for this weekend are hard. The readings for this weekend are hard. The gospel reading is in the middle of Jesus warning the disciples just how difficult it's going to be to follow him and to be his disciple, just how much it's going to demand of their whole being and of their whole lives. It begins by saying, first of all, he says, a disciple is not greater than his teacher. A slave is not greater than his master. He says, if this is how they treat me, you may be sure that you will be treated no better and possibly even worse. He goes on to say, but don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the people who may destroy your body. It's the one who destroys your soul that you really need to fear, he says. He then goes on to say, don't worry, don't be afraid. Look at the sparrows, he said. Aren't they 2 a penny? And yet he says, your Father in heaven doesn't allow a single one of them to fall to the ground. Are you not worth more than many sparrows? The Father has counted the hairs upon your head. But then he goes on to say, do not imagine that following me is going to be easy. I haven't come to bring peace on earth, he says. I haven't come to bring peace on earth. I'm bringing a sword. He says this, from now on, a mother and daughter will be against each other. A son and father will be against each other. Your enemies will be the members of your own household. And he says, whoever doesn't love me more than members of their own family isn't worthy of me. And then he goes on to say even more than this, whoever doesn't take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who aren't prepared to give up their lives will lose them altogether. Those who give up their life for my sake will gain their life. These are hard words. And St. Paul also, in the letter to Romans, says, we were baptized into the death of Christ. We were baptized into the death of Christ in order that we might be raised with him to new life. He said, in baptism, your old self died. You were raised a new person. In other words, he's saying, if you want to be a disciple, you cannot imagine that you can do it and go on being the same person that you were before. There is a radical difference. You must be prepared to be changed. You must be prepared to be changed radically. That's what he's saying. These are hard words, and who can make sense of these words, and who can accept these words and believe that they come from a God who loves us? To be sure, they are not words which simply make an appeal to reason, and they make no sense at all unless they are spoken by somebody we know loves us, and unless they are spoken within a relationship such as the relationship which Jesus had with his disciples, a relationship of love, a relationship of living together. And so I think looking at these readings today, we need to consider them within the idea of our relationship with God and look at it from what our own relationships may teach us to help us to understand what these words have to say to us today. Those of us who have been called to marry, those of us who marry, know that when we marry somebody, when we became married to someone else, our lives changed. We did not simply continue to be the person that we were before. Of course, the person who married us didn't think, well, I'll change that person into the person I want them to be. And hopefully, when I married Carol, I didn't think, well, I'll turn her into the kind of woman I want her to be. That would have been very foolish. And she is basically the same person, of course she is. But we change each other. We change each other. We give up things for one another. We change the direction of our lives with and for one another. It is not as it was before. We don't want it to be as it was before. We go off in a new direction in our lives, and we do that within a relationship of love. I think it helps me to think about these words that Jesus is telling us if we believe that it is spoken within a relationship of love, the love that God has for us, the love that we have for God, our experience of being loved. That's the only way in which I can make sense of these words, in which they are, if I can put it that way, acceptable. Because Jesus is saying, what I am calling you to do is so important. The gospel I am entrusting to you is so important. It has such a vital role to play in the future of the world and in its present, that everything else pales into insignificance. And we have to be convinced that what God calls us to is the most important thing in our lives, beside which everything else pales into insignificance. Today, on a beautiful day, I have been at the seaside, and considering the immensity and the power of the ocean, the beauty and the harmony of the world, which speak to me of the incredible and mysterious nature of the Creator of all these things. Looking at the immensity of that world and its order and its beauty, it is almost unimaginable that the Creator of that world could have a role of any particular significance or meaning for me to play. And yet, this is what I believe as a Christian, and this is what I understand through my baptism that I have been called into and brought into. But that role only has any sense and any purpose and any meaning within a relationship of love. And that goes for the whole of my life. It is within a relationship of love that I married and that my life has taken that direction. It is within a relationship of love that I've been blessed with children and bring them up. It is within a relationship of love that I try to relate to my community, to my work in hospital day by day, and everything that I do. And a relationship of love involves action, involves prayer, and involves listening. We, in this day in 2020, are very aware of the great advances in science, in progress, and the great things that the human race has done. And I'm aware in hospital of how much can be done for people by natural science, by medical advances, in terms of healing their bodies and making people well. But making people's minds whole, making people as people whole, requires more than technical efficiency. It requires love. It requires love, and that requires listening, and that requires caring. Let me tell you a couple of little instances of what I mean. A man I was with in hospital not so very long ago, and he was desperate to go home to the wife he loved, facing what he knew was a fatal diagnosis, and he refused to eat, he refused all help. I was talking to him and asked him what he wanted. He said he couldn't face anything. All he could manage, he said, was rice. The staff were listening on the ward, and they cared for that man. It wasn't on the menu, but they went out and got him 3 helpings of rice pudding. That man ate it, and for that moment, I'm afraid it didn't last for very long, but for that moment, he came back to life. He wasn't fretful. He wasn't in that agony that he was anymore. He was at peace for a little moment. In the end, he did go home to his wife, which is where he wanted to be, to spend his final days. Another man that I came across a couple of years ago in hospital, very ill, very depressed, and unwilling to be treated in any way. He couldn't believe that there was any point in going on any longer. He just wanted to be finished with it all. And I was talking to him and listening to him, and it came out that what he really wanted was beer. He wanted a bottle of brown ale. And I went down to Tesco and got him a bottle of brown ale, and with the help of the nurse, we put some thickener in it because his swallowing wasn't very good. And he drank it with a straw. Warm brown ale with thickener, indeed. And I said to him, "What does it taste like?" And he said, "Beer." And it was a turning point because somebody had listened to him, and somebody had cared for him, and somebody had taken his concerns seriously. Somebody had shown him love. Somebody had shown him love. He, following on from that, was able to make some peace with his family, things he needed to do. And he recited to me a prayer which was there in the back of his memory about 4 angels standing at the corners of his bed, 2 at the feet and 2 at his head. And I think it goes on to say something along the lines of, "I pray the Lord my soul to keep." And about if he should die that night, he prayed the Lord his soul to keep. He had the words of the prayer there in his head. It came to him, and he went in peace. He went in peace. In little ways, I know Barbara was talking about St. Davis, speaking about the need to do the little things. In little ways, we change the world by changing the lives of people. In little ways, we change the world by changing the lives of people, by listening and by loving, as our Lord came and listened and taught. In little ways, we are changed. We are changed not by those who terrify us. We are not changed by those who bully us. We are changed by those who love us, who encourage us, who build us up, who enable us to believe that we are more than merely the sum of our parts, because we are the children of God. Jesus said to his disciples, "Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, even if being a disciple is hard, even if it's not fashionable, not popular, even if most people, even members of your own family, despise you for what you do. Do not be afraid. Every hair of your head has been counted. You are worth more than many sparrows. You are part of the kingdom of God." Some words from Psalm 69. I think it's Psalm 69. Speaking of God answering the prayer of the one who is in trouble. "Answer me, Lord, with your unfailing help. Save me from the mire. Do not let me sink. Let me be rescued from those who hate me and from the deep waters. Do not let the torrent of water wash over me. Do not let the deep swallow me up. Do not let the pit shut its mouth on me. Answer me, Lord, for your love is kind. In your great compassion, turn to me. Do not hide your face from your servant. Be swift and answer me, for I am in distress. Come near to me and redeem me. Because of my enemies, deliver me. Thanks be to God.